All right, we're live-ish. All right, thanks folks for joining the Security Collab space on this June 24th, 2024. There's a couple, Rudd unfortunately will not be able to join us today. He's sick. So I'm going to cover for him. So he requested that I get feedback from folks on some specific items in the compliance standard that we've been working on. So if folks are up for that, let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to share the URL, but I'll also share my screen. So I know that we've reviewed this before, so hopefully this isn't new for folks. This is the draft security checklist, right? Let me share my screen. Hopefully folks will be able to see this okay. Share screen. Where are you? Okay, sorry, I just have to like move everyone's faces around so that I can work on this. Okay, so the topics that he wanted to discuss were SSH passwords, settings that require admin privileges, and pin dev build dependencies. So I think there's some comments already in here that we can discuss. So I'll just run through. Is this big enough for folks? Can you actually read this, or are you just following along at home?
I want to say it's definitely not readable for me, but I also have the document open.
Okay,
Likewise.
Okay, so let's look at the first one here. So the first one that we wanted to talk about is on line 13, use SSH keys with a passphrase. Okay. So Jordan says, I never use this passphrase, usually hit, just isn't worth it. Yep. And his comment is, hey, if someone's able to access my SSH directory, they already on my machine. Yeah, I'll let folks read this comment. What do folks currently do here on this one?
I mean, that's kind of a hard position for Jordan to defend. I mean, using passphrase with SSH keys is pretty standard, recommended security practice. Even if he doesn't like it, frankly. So it doesn't seem controversial to me. At the same time, it's a little bit outside it could be argued is somewhat outside the scope of a guide like this because it's not necessarily specific to like a project and its configuration. These are individual users and their SSH keys. And there have been a couple of other things in that category that we've removed from this document because it was like an end user thing. Now, that being said, it's a little bit in between because this is presumably we're talking about SSH keys that will be used for authentication with regard to the project, either the repository or NPM publication or and things like that. So you could suggest that it be in a guide like this.
I just want to be sure I understand. Oh, sorry. Oh, Jordan, hey, how's it going?
All right, I got here late. I mean, the SSH for a JavaScript project, the SSH key doesn't have any bearing to NPM, which is in fact the only the primary attack vector that's important. Someone can compromise GitHub all they want if it doesn't get published, who cares? So there's that. But then, as I said in my comment, right, if someone's on my machine, it's game over anyway. Like they're going to get me eventually. Who cares if it takes them an extra a couple hours to exfiltrate my password after keylogging it. In practice, there's far more direct means for them to do attacks. So like I also agree with sort of what I heard Chris saying. It's just that it's sort of like out of scope for this. But even if we include it, I mean, this has always been one of those like, well, obviously you should do this for security. Obviously you should change your password every month for security. Obviously you should use numbers and letters and have a certain length. But like, just because some like most of the security best practices that have been obviously standard for decades turned out to actually decrease security when evaluated at scale. And I feel like this is one of them.
So some of them that's true. Like password rotation is one that's
Yeah.
controversial. And that was actually my comment on one of the other items that was about rotating keys, which was different, but in the similar vein. But this is not quite the same. I wouldn't want to conflate it entirely. And by the way, you know, your SSH key can end up on a machine that's not your own. So it doesn't, you know, this vector doesn't necessarily 100% predicated on compromised access to your workstation.
How?
It's a file. It can be moved.
Well, right, but so in order for somebody to take the file, though, they would have to have access to my machine.
Or you would have to have sent it. People do share as SSH keys do move around. They do.
Okay.
They do get shared, but there are shared SSH keys that get used. It's not always that it's each individual having one for every purpose. At the same time, this is, you know, this, like many of the other things on this list, will be sort of honor system, right? It's, you can't prove that somebody is using a passphrase or not with their SSH key.
Also true. And you can't prove that the passphrase isn't password, for example.
Right. It could be 1, 2, 3. It could be anything.
Yeah. And it, like yeah, anyway, I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
I don't think this is a bad thing to have on there. And I think it's something that people that don't like to use the passphrases will continue to just ignore. So I guess the downside of having it on there is just the fact that it increases the number, right? Is that like, what else is the...
Well, the downside, I think, is recommendation fatigue. Like, it's
right.
We're going to be giving people a list of asks to do thanklessly and voluntarily and voluntarily, and like everything we ask them to do should be so important that like it's worth the inherent high cost of asking someone to do something for free. So I don't think it's actually harmful to have in here on its own. I think it's just I don't think there's really any benefit to having it, and I think that something that has zero benefit actually on a list like this has harm.
I mean, it doesn't have zero benefit. I think that's hard to...
Or I mean, it's unprovable, and it's, you know, we're not all in agreement that it has benefits. So it's like, but sure, I mean, even if it has some benefit, right, that has to outweigh the harm and of just existing on the list.
We talked about stack ranking some of the recommendations, like have a short list and then have a longer list. Could we just move it down on a priority?
I mean, well, so depending on how we organize that, this would tend to be on like the lower hanging fruit side, though. This would be on like right at the beginning, where you could say, oh yeah, we do that, we check it off, and the harder stuff is at the bottom. So this would kind of be like in that sense, sort of like a higher priority thing.
Let's look at Steve's comment. Can it?
Yeah, I was asking if it can be combined with another of the requirements of just using SSH keys in general.
Yeah, there's the one right above it, which is
I was kind of thinking use SSH keys with a passphrase for developer access. I mean, kind of captures both, but I don't know if the intent was to keep this separate 100% to allow optionality later.
I think it's a good point, and I think it's a good idea, because it is part of the same thing, right? You're saying use SSH keys. It's not really, if you're using SSH keys, the passphrase is coming along with that. It's not a separate thing that you do later. You have to do it at the time that you're creating your SSH key or replacing your SSH key. So yeah, I like that. I think just bundle it in.
And then if this is stack ranked, or if we do a required recommended, because this is now combined with using SSH keys for developer access, it should be right like a requirement, or is that correct? Like or top of the
Yeah,
list. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that doesn't change. They're all right now, they're all marked as expected.
Marco, I saw your comment. Is there a reason why? On Node?
We simply do not enforce, like when people install GPG keys on their machine, and it's simply not in the documentation, the guidelines, so it's up to the releaser.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's totally fine, like if somebody wants to do that. I mean, if like I only SSH from my personal laptop that's always in my physical possession, but if I were, you know, SSHing into a server somewhere else and then SSHing from there to GitHub, I would definitely have a passphrase on it because I don't control that machine. So like it's sort of it is nuanced, right? Like there are cases where it helps a lot to have a passphrase. It's just like I feel like I can determine that for myself. And if we can come up, it's fine to come up with guidelines, but at some point, that's a lot of effort for, like, you know, I don't know. I don't know how helpful it would be to have those guidelines. Like, I don't know who's going to be using an SSH key, know how to make one with a passphrase, and not know the nuances involved. But I'm sure those people are out there.
Okay. All right, next up here, sorry, is GitHub webhooks use secrets.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same thing. It's like, I mean, GitHub webhooks themselves, I don't actually use webhooks that much, so it's but in general, the like you have the use secrets thing, right? Like it's
Is this like a token in the webhook URL? I'm just unclear about what this means.
yeah,
Like in
let me
practice.
so when I go to edit a webhook, I see there's a field payload URL, content type, and secret. And I don't have like my Travis webhook from forever ago doesn't have a secret in it. My Sneak webhook does have a secret. So I'm guessing it's like a way to make sure that nobody can like curl a webhook and trigger it. And I think that's fine. It just sort of depends on what the hook does, though. Like it's fine to have to report to suggest to use a secret. It's just kind of like I feel like this is the same sort of vein as the GitHub Actions like pinning thing. It's like if the workflow is doing something dangerous, something that if compromised would actually matter, then you should lock it down any way you can, which includes pinning and, you know, secrets and all that stuff. But if in fact there's no like if I don't know, if your linting run gets compromised, like, oh no, like it's just not, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a big deal. And again, it's in sort of the bucket of like it's sort of like useless, but not a neutral thing. Like it's useless, it's not harmful, and therefore by default it's harmful.
It does depend on what your webhook does in terms of what the potential attack vector results in. But like having an unauthenticated endpoint that anybody in the world can hit, and having that request be processed is not great by default.
Sure, and part of this would be protecting you from, if you are under the assumption that what you're doing is not high risk, but it turns out that your understanding is wrong, right? Or it exposes something else that is high risk.
Or something changes later and your endpoint is still available anonymously to the entire world, to anybody send a request to.
Okay, any other comments before I write something here? We okay to keep it?
Yeah, it's fine to keep it. I think we should just make sure there's some nuance in there about, you know, like why it's a concern. If people are thinking about like, well, what if somebody wrote a script to hit the webhook a million times a minute, like, or sent malicious input to it? Like, if that's at all concerning, definitely use secrets. If not, you may still want to, but it, you know, maybe up to you. I don't know, something like that.
Okay, next up here, rotation policy.
So
We
this
sort of
was,
touched on this earlier.
yeah, I don't,
Like-
was this just renamed from the original key rotation item, or is this a different item?
I think it's about service accounts, like bot accounts, but like GitHub doesn't have a doesn't actually have a bot account feature. GitHub's official advice continues to be astonishingly like, just make a human account and then don't give the username and password to anyone and call it a bot account. And so like, which that's horrific, but like that's the way it just works until they fix it. And so what happens is that you make an account, whoever made the account puts the credentials in your company's vault and nobody ever looks at them again. And the person who makes the account creates like a secret or a token or whatever access they need. And then the token is the thing that gets looked at and used more often by like engineers in the company or maintainers in the code base. And yeah, and so like the credentials aren't exposed. The credentials are probably safer than normal account credentials because they're never used. The token though, whatever the thing that's actually used in workflows and stuff is, you could argue that that could be rotated. But like, it's not guessable in the like lifetime of the universe or something. So it's like, it doesn't seem like it matters too much. It's like a password is chosen by the user, and so there is a risk that they will choose like a brute forceable word or phrase. There's no, that doesn't exist for tokens, right? Like it would require, you know, someone to invent a quantum computer to be able to like, you know, unless it like leaks, which is I think the argument for rotating the tokens.
See if I can find my comments on the earlier key rotation item, because I think that they apply here. And that is I'm going to read out my whole thing. Apologies in advance. So this was on a similar item about key rotation, automated systems, and key rotation individual user accounts. That was eventually removed, but this is like a variation on the same theme. And I had given some feedback, and it's like, could we a concrete example where a user performing key rotation would introduce a new risk? From our responses, it can give false confidence with regard to key revocation in the case of a compromised key. It can give a false sense of confidence that old keys are no longer in use when in fact they still might be. Due to not having been removed from some places, it introduces complexity and overhead, which can lead to slip-ups in managing keys, which can't be mitigated without some sort of management system for tracking. Surface area for human error and key management scales directly proportionally to the key rotation requirements, potentially leading to lockout or vulnerabilities. Where you can have a proper key management system that logs changes, additions, removals, inventory, key revocation procedure, etc., with clear processes, then these problems are mitigated, but that's a lot to ask of maintainers. So my comments are similar here. It's easy to say have a key rotation policy, but you're potentially doing more harm than good by doing this unless you have like a full-blown proper key management system with tracking and inventorying and all of these things and a process for what happens when you are aware of a compromised key. And usually by the time your key is compromised, your revocation procedure is not going to be fast enough anyway. So all of these things need to be weighed against the value of having this guideline in here. And then on top of that, there's the question of, is anybody actually going to do this if we recommend it? Maybe in very, very large projects, perhaps, where they can have a key management system. But in the absence of that, I find it difficult to recommend this.
I think I agree with you. I'm just thinking of, I think your comment about like the process that needs to be put in place for this to be effective, and the overhead on that is really spot on. And when I think about our portfolio of projects and who's going to do this, yeah, I agree with you.
Like I think it, and as I've said before on some of the other things we've removed, I don't think it's great to just remove something entirely and not ever speak to it. There maybe can be like an appendix of things where this could go and say, this is a great best practice, but like here are the things you must have in place in order to do this effectively, and things you need to consider. It's not just something that can be easily checked off a box and say, oh, let's rotate the key every 90 days and call it a day, because that's not enough.
Okay. Ah. Any of these ones we want to talk about? I have on the list settings that require admin privileges and pinning dev build dependencies, but I'm happy to just go through. There aren't a ton of comments in here if it's worth it. See if we can just like resolve as many as we can. Okay, sorry, I skipped one. Let's get to that next. Okay.
Yeah, that was just a nit. Like 2 lines up, he says EG ESLint, and it seems like this should say EG code QL. That's all.
Okay.
I think this is good on single maintainer projects. And I feel like, again, I had comments on this. There might have been like a duplicate item.
I mean, certainly before publishing anything, the publisher should be able to look at a passing CI build, like with all the various required checks. But like, who cares if I push up something that's broken to master? Nobody should be using it for master or main or whatever.
So
Like
this
GitHub
was
is
a
not for
similar,
consumption.
yeah,
Yeah.
so my comment, the comment I'm thinking of, I just found was on, it was on prevent force push on default branch, and it said something like for non-single maintainer projects, and I said, this is a good rule to have even on single maintainer, because it's similar to requiring pull requests and status checks to pass. Admins can always bypass the restriction, so there's no harm in expecting it, and it can also protect against regression. You know, I am not terribly embarrassed to admit that to this day, I still, with some regularity, YOLO up changes without compiling or testing, and then find that I've broken them in CI. So it's, I'm not the only one. So I think it's fine to have that as a rule, that single maintainers can still merge without those checks passing anyway.
That is a very strong argument for why the setting should be on. But as written, this seems like it means that if I push something to main without passing the status checks, then I'm bad. And I don't know if that, I don't know. I don't feel great about that implication.
I mean, what status check would not pass that you would want to merge?
Well,
Usually
and
when I
hopefully they would all
bypass status
pass.
checks, it's because something like didn't run properly, or
For expedience, or because
Sure.
my CI runs on 200 node minor versions, and I don't do that all locally. So I do some basic testing locally, and I'm like, seems like it'll work, and I push it up, and then CI tells me if it did or not. And I don't usually waste the time to go through the ceremony of pushing to a branch, waiting for that to pass, and then pushing that to main, which I could do. That's just extra work, and nobody cares because it's not released, and it's like most of my repos aren't active, so it's not confusing anyone. Like most people will have no, like there is a feature on GitHub where you can see how many force pushes have been done and to what branches on a repo, which you can't turn off, which I'm not a fan of. But so you can go see how many times on any particular repo I've force pushed to main or whatever, and I guarantee you it's way more than anybody notices. The thing I never do is force push over a published commit, like a published, release tag. At that point, I treat Git as immutable, but like anything that's unreleased and it isn't attached to a pull request ref, I don't care. Like,
Marco?
Yeah, I
Maybe
believe this.
go ahead.
Yeah, this check is actually like useful for general purpose, because most of the times you don't want other like for single maintainers project doesn't make much sense, but for multiple maintainers projects you don't want other maintainers to merge pull requests carelessly. You want the CI to be green, and that helps a lot with the process also. Like imagine if you have a lot of checks in place and you merge a PR without those being fully green, like it doesn't make sense to me. So I'm +1 on keeping this one.
So here's the other thing. They're required status checks for a reason. If they're not important for you to merge, then don't mark them as required status checks. These things shouldn't be in conflict.
The required status checks are for everyone else. They're not for me. I put them so that
required status checks for thee and not for me.
Yes, that's right. I put them so that pull request contributors don't have to wait for me to tell them what's broken, and they can go fix it. And it's a helpful reminder for me, but like I know when I need to, when I can or can't merge something, and I don't need that to be enforced for me.
I think you've just strengthened the argument for leaving this guideline. It's important for everyone else that their status checks pass before merging.
On a single maintainer project with no active contributors, yeah, that's how I treat it.
Sounds like
Okay, so I'm going to say the consensus here is to keep. I do feel like we are going to have a Jordan Harbin OpenJS security compliance standard specific to this project's complete with t-shirts. But yeah, I just joined.
Yeah, like I said, the setting is fine. It's just, you know, the moral implication that I'm not super on board with.
The Jordan cut.
Jordan edit. Okay. Okay, we did this one, we did that one. Can't condone this being expected till we approve the guidelines. Yeah, that's right.
Security MD mates OpenJS. Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Oops. Article leverages CVD tool to privately receive, manage external vulnerability reports. Is this another one where we need an EG and that
Yep, that's exactly.
okay.
Because yeah, HackerOne's obviously fine, but most people aren't going to go through to those links. They're just going to use PVR.
Okay.
GitHub Actions restricted to selected.
I read this as referring to an org admin and repo admin setting where you can say people with write access on the repo are unable to depend on actions that come from, except from the repositories that are blessed. And that setting is not like lots of people need to be able to maintain a project even if they're not an admin on it. And especially single maintainer projects, especially when a single maintainer is maintaining a different user's project where GitHub doesn't allow you to grant admin permissions on it. So like, and then conceptually, like and if you take a setting out of it, then the GitHub actions I have chosen is the set that is selected. And if I with write access add in another one, then I have just increased the set. And that's just, so there's like, it's trying to prevent somebody without write access without admin access from sneaking in an action from somewhere else, basically, which like kind of makes sense. But I mean, I guess I'm not like, if you have write access, I feel like you can already just add in a workflow file that does whatever you want. Maybe it makes it slightly more obfuscated if it's coming from some random place.
So the other thing is, I think there may be a misconception here, and this is partially my fault because this comes from the OpenSSF best practices SCM guide, which is because it enables malicious activities such as accessing organization secrets, but that's not. And then there's something about crypto mining, which I'm not even sure how you're going to do that. But on the organization secrets, by default, the organization secrets are not available across all repositories. You specifically select which repositories get. So it's the other way around. You don't restrict actions to specific repository, you restrict secrets to specific repositories. And if that's not in here, that should be. And I don't think it's bad to restrict actions to specific repositories, but I also think it's okay to not do that either. Because remember, these are also users in your organization that have write access to one or more repos. Presumably they should have some degree of trust.
Right access.
Again, the main thing is that they can't just at will exfiltrate organization secrets. because that's not
Unless
what
they
we
also
want.
have write access to one of the selected repositories, in which case there's no protection at all.
Well, yeah, but then none of this matters at that point.
Right.
Alrighty, so if we were to condense our discussion into a recommendation on this one. Is it keep as is?
No, I think mine would be sorry, I'm trying to scan if there's another item for the secrets concern. Yeah, I would so it's two options. Either change it to for the rule to be to restrict GitHub organization secrets to the repositories that need them. But that might be too confusing to just change this item rather than strike this item, and we should create a new item for the GitHub secret access, which I will add right now. Or I'm not sure if I can edit this directly. I cannot, so I cannot add it. I'll add it as a comment.
Just realized, let me not expose everyone's email addresses on the call. Okay. So I'm gonna pull up this one so folks can read while Chris is adding that comment.
You scroll down this. Oh wait, never mind. That's me. I had my Zoom faces over it. Yeah, so this is sort of the NPM ecosystem has for almost the entirety of its existence pretty universally decided you should never pin dependencies. You should use a lock file. Although I have arguments about you should only use a lock file in applications. NPM since version 5 has defaulted to enabling a dev-only lock file in all projects. And at this point, like if you pin dependencies, you don't actually get pinning because transitive dependencies aren't pinned. And if you use a lock file and don't pin dependencies, your dependencies are pinned. So like the kind of already objectively correct way to do this is to never pin anything and always use a lock file. And then like that allows your developers, like it allows the updates to be seamless. It allows like consumers to know that compatibility, there's a Semver range and that they can update to bug fixes. If you pin your dependencies, you've prevented your consumers from on their own getting vulnerability fixes and bug fixes and new features. So it's like actively harmful to pin dependencies. You can do it in an application and it's not harmful. It just makes the developer experience worse for no benefit since you have a lock file.
Sorry, which item
So
are
like
we
pretty, build dependencies are pinned. So like, I feel like there's only two ways we can talk about pinning. One is pinning GitHub actions, and the other is everything like NPM dependencies. And I think we should never tell anyone to pin any kind of NPM dependencies, full stop. GitHub actions is a separate conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see a compelling reason to, if we're talking about the dev dependencies block, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yep. Yeah, it makes even less sense, but like the same advice applies. Like you can't you can't make a lock file that can only pin prod or only pin dep dependencies. Unfortunately, that would actually allow for a lot of different use cases. But so if you have a lock file, everything's pinned, even if it's not pinned in the package JSON. And so then therefore there is no benefit to pinning in the package JSON, and there is harm.
Yeah, I think there wasn't any actual disagreement on this item. It just hasn't been followed up on.
Okay.
Is the
That's
consensus
my read of it anyway.
Is the consensus to change this to reference lock files or to just remove it?
Just
to
remove it,
remove
I
it.
think.
Okay. All right. And alrighty, next up here we're on line 54 for those following along.
Yeah, but you said remove it, but I mean, I would leave it and rewrite it and then capture a summation of what Jordan said and say, here's the recommended approach. I mean, it would be helpful just to know you thought about it and what the methodology is that the foundation picked for people to use and why. I don't know. Anyway.
What does that look like to you? Like, what would that?
Our methodology is to use a package lock file for these reasons, A, B, C, D. And this is the reason why, so we've changed the flavor of the question. But anyway.
But we have other items for
The
log file.
okay, didn't know that. Say see not applicable, see those line items then.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're capturing what you're.
Yeah, I'm
asking
a
about losing
flyby.
it.
I'm flyby. I count on you, Chris, to make sure everything's fine tooth comb and airtight. I'm just giving my impression that I hate seeing checklist items deleted if there are consideration that people who, if this is being broad, or if you want to know if that's their question, say, well, that's not a realistic question from our ecosystem, and it's addressed in these other items below, or above.
Yeah, for sure. No, you're right. And this is a refrain that I think I've already repeated at least once today, but certainly previously, which is that we shouldn't just not have there shouldn't just be like a gap of some particular aspect, right? Even if we're not providing the guideline of here's what we expect you to do, it shouldn't be omitted entirely, and we should speak to it and why we're not providing a guideline or why it's more complex than just.
Yeah, that's my sentiment.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's my sentiment. So thanks.
And some of this information is already in the guide I wrote for the OpenSSF CII best practices badge. So anyone who follows that gets a significant percentage of the spreadsheet by default anyway, with motivations and explanations. That doesn't mean we have to use that document at all or wholesale. I just mean feel free to refer to it as if anyone wants inspiration or example text, or if someone wants to link to it.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. I think there's only 3 comments on here, but I'd also like to just spend maybe the last 5 minutes talking about the next steps for this document and how folks think we should proceed with publishing and how we want to introduce this to the community and what that looks like. Does that seem okay?
Yeah. I mean, the audience for this spreadsheet to me is folks who are taking ecosystem industry-wide recommendation.
Yeah, I just want to go through the rest of the comments and we'll talk about.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I do appreciate the enthusiasm. Okay, line 54, automated processes used to monitor. thoughts, feedback on this one?
Yeah, so out of date, I think that's a really bad and harmful metric. Recency is not a signal, and something hasn't been touched in 10 years. That means precisely nothing. The actual metric that matters is if a security issue appears, how quickly will it get addressed, and is the maintainer active in programming or in the technology ecosystem sufficiently so
And I
that
think,
they're still monitoring the security of their accounts.
sorry, I think we might be getting mixed up on something. I don't think it's
Sure.
meant to capture dependencies that have not been
Oh,
updated.
this is
It's
just
meant
like
to capture
Dependabot.
when you're behind, like the dependency has been.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You're right.
Up,
I'm talking about the
yeah.
line below it. Okay.
And the line
Yeah, I
below
mean,
it
I
is
think
not necessarily the same thing either, right? End of life is not
Yeah.
necessarily
Okay.
it
The
go-
EOS is the part that I'm replying to for
Yeah,
that.
and
But
Jordan, your recommendation here was about like making this a recommended from required,
yes,
right?
just softer.
The folks agree?
um
See ya.
sorry, what are we doing here?
Sorry, we're online. I know we're going through a massive spreadsheet.
So this
We
is
are
like
on line 54. This is about automated process to monitor.
so like Dependabot, renovate, things like that.
And we don't want to make that expected.
I mean, it's fine if you do, but like I don't like those tools. My dependencies are sufficiently up to date and like they're very noisy. Dependabot in particular is I wish GitHub had acquired a different one, but like it's not easy to set it up so that the noise level is not bothersome. And like often there's a reason you're not using a new major version. So I don't really need to be told that a new major version is out. I'm stuck on this one for a reason. And separately, like I only need to be told to update things if tests fail. So if something's in range and the tests pass, I don't want to be told, but all of those tools don't usually do that because then it costs them more time and money. Like it's more expensive to actually give a more meaningful set of notifications. So like I prefer not to use the tools because I keep up on my dependencies. The tools are valuable for someone who doesn't do that. So the line should like the recommendation should be there in one form or the other, but expected feels like that. I'm reading that word as required, mandatory, and that feels too heavy-handed for me.
You can configure Dependabot to not to ignore some for major.
Sure, there's some configurations on it, but I don't like. In my experience, it makes a pull request every time there's an update of any kind. And in fact, the only time I want those pull requests is when the tests are going to fail, because that's the only time I have to do anything because I use Semver ranges like everyone else.
Yeah, I would say that I would agree that you don't have to make required the thing that detects out of date packages, as long as there is something automated letting you know about vulnerable packages.
Yeah, that's fair. I use those. I run npm audit on every CI run.
I'm trying
So
to
that's like
remember.
a separate line item. Like there's vulnerable, there's out of date, and then there's the line 55. And
Yeah.
vulnerable, I agree. That's something we should say is expected.
We
It
already
doesn't
did
have to be a
that.
monitoring service, but like you should be able to be notified relatively quickly when something like it has vulnerabilities. Out of date, I feel like I'd rather that not be required, and I'm fine with it being recommended. And then we'll talk about line 55 next.
Do we have a separate item for? I feel like we have to, right? There's got to be something that detects. Yeah, automated process to identify dependencies with publicly disclosed vulnerability. Okay, we have it captured somewhere else, so yeah, I'm fine
Great.
with this being a recommended or yeah, not required. I think that's perfectly fair. Because just because there's a new version of something doesn't mean there's an impact to your security.
Right.
Yeah, I think this will be the last one we have time to cover.
So yeah, I mean, I'm keenly aware of this now because of my employer, but there isn't a reliable source of data for something being end of life. If a NPM package is deprecated, that is an indicator that that version is end of life. And if there are no non-deprecated versions, then that is an indicator there. And so you can use that. But most maintainers who have end of life packages don't actually NPM deprecate them. So it's just not something you can programmatically determine unless somebody has manually curated things and then produced a programmatically accessible service or database. And then you have to delegate your trust to that manual review process or AI-based review process, which I would hope you would delegate less trust to. So like, it's great that Socket has some indications here, but like Socket is using heuristics in AI, and like even on my own packages, they've been inaccurate in the past. So yeah, and endoflife.date is a great community resource like that can help. So there's a lot of things, a lot of ways that you can suggest that maybe this package isn't supported, but it's just not a reliable thing to do. And there's not like a trivially available thing you can use in your open source project that is reliable. Like socket.dev is the closest. And I think that I trust those people to eventually get there, but I think they're a ways off from that place.
Yeah, and end of life.date doesn't go as granular as a major. I mean, they have some of the NPM stuff, but not nearly enough to have value for that ecosystem.
Right.
Yeah, I really don't I don't think it's good to have any item on this list where the remediation for the project is to go to this particular vendor and that's your only recourse. I'm not in love with the ones where the recourse is to use the thing within GitHub, but it's, I think, acceptable because it's baked into GitHub, right? So like CodeQL and Dependabot. If those are moving the needle, like that's fine, but like only.
And there are options that aren't baked into GitHub for that.
Sure.
Like you can do static analysis instead of using CodeQL. It's just harder to set up. And the same with, you can use Renovate instead of Dependabot, for example. Right. Yeah. So like, I think there's a big difference between something where we're suggesting the GitHub option versus when that's the only option. And in this case, like, yeah, it's not even GitHub that's the only option.
I need to drop too, but I still think we should be keeping our list of GitHub NPM asks from this group and package it up. So, okay.
Okay, we'll just finish our thoughts on this one and then we can adjourn.
Sounds good.
I need to drop it. Thanks all.
Thanks, Robin. All right, so I captured the comment here, Chris, from you around, which there seems to be consensus on, of like if the remediation here is you need to use this third-party service, not including GitHub, like that's not a great idea.
And that's also a huge ask for anybody, right? Oh, you got to go and create an account at this thing, like you've got to do a new, so I don't know if there's some alternate tooling or something like a GitHub action you can pull in, like maybe that's a little more palatable. But again, back to Matt's comment earlier, like, there should be, even if this isn't a checklist item, we can include some information about it and for folks that want to do this, or information on why we couldn't strongly recommend it, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Does that capture what I wrote? I just want to be sure I'm like.
Oh, for discussion, functionality requirements.
I think I got to drop too.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think, or if there's some additional options that we don't know about or aren't documented here. Like, is there a way, if there's a way to be in compliance with this rule or guideline, without going to like the third part, then it's okay. But we don't know what that is right now.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
but otherwise, this looks good. Thanks, Ben.
Great. Thank you both. I appreciate you going 2 minutes over. Thanks,
Sure.
Chris. Good to see you. Thanks, Matt.
Talk
Good
to
to
you
see
later.
you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye, folks.
Bye.